the Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
The Prime Minister is a busy man. Not only has he been in Rwanda, Bavaria, but tonight he's off to Madrid as well. It's the NATO summit. What does NATO mean in modern Europe? Also, Nicola Sturgeon today plans to set out her plans for a further partition vote of the United Kingdom. And can the UK become a scientific superpower? Well, all those questions we'll explore today after the headlines.
A very good morning, it's 9:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Emergency crews are digging through the rubble of a Ukrainian shopping centre, searching for survivors after a Russian missile strike killed at least 18 people. Local authorities report that 25 people have been hospitalised, while about 36 people are missing after the attack in the city of Kremenchuk. President Zelensky says before air raid sirens, more than 1,000 civilians were inside the building. The Prime Minister and his fellow G7 leaders have accused the Russian president of war crimes and say he'll be held to account for the attack. Boris Johnson's travelling to Madrid this afternoon for the start of the NATO summit as the G7 comes to a close. The new head of the British Army is warning that Britain is facing its 1937 moment and must be ready to prevent the spread of war in Europe. General Sir Patrick Sanders says he's never seen such a clear threat to peace and democracy as the brutal aggression of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, in the US, the bodies of 46 migrants have been found abandoned in a truck in Texas near the Mexican border. 16 others, including 4 children, were found alive and they're being treated for heat stroke and exhaustion. Police say 3 people are now in custody. MPs have passed a bill which effectively scraps parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol. No Conservative MPs voted against it, but dozens abstained, including the former Prime Minister Theresa May, who said it would diminish the UK's global standing. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's head back to Tom for this morning's briefing.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:34 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, firstly, later today, First Minister of Scotland Nicola Sturgeon will set out plans for breaking up the United Kingdom. Our Scotland reporter Davy Donaldson has been speaking to the people of Edinburgh to find out what they think of that proposed referendum rerun, the plan to partition our island.
I think it'll be a landslide this time for yes, so just looking forward to that.
I take it obviously you'll be voting in favour of it.
Yes, absolutely.
And what do you say to people that are concerned about how it's going to work and the money as well? Apparently £3.5 billion shortfall.
I think that's just propaganda, Tory propaganda.
I am an SNP supporter, however I'm not for Indy Ref 2. Was all for it, Indy Ref 1, but I think they could do with spending the money elsewhere.
I'm all for it. I'm a member of the Cyrillic Pipes and Drums.
OK, and a lot of people will say that, you know, where's the money coming from and how's it going to work?
We're a rich country. Too poor, too small, too stupid. No.
Well, some views from people in Edinburgh this week, but let's have a look at what the data says about this. Here are the latest opinion polls for those watching on television. You can see really quite wiggly lines there. I'll try and describe for those listening on radio. No, the red line, those who do not want Scotland to break away from the United Kingdom, was leading and indeed growing its lead right up through 2017. A lot of people don't know this, that actually after the Brexit referendum, no grew in its lead ahead of yes. Those who want the United Kingdom to stay together was growing in strength. But then the pandemic happened, and just look at what happened to that line in favour of separation, in favour of partition. It crept up and up and up until the peak of the pandemic, when Nicola Sturgeon was using her pandemic powers to their extreme. The yes question. Those who want Scotland to be a separate country dipped ahead there for several months, dipped ahead of those who want the United Kingdom to stay together. But this is little reported. What happened next? Well, suddenly, as the pandemic drew to a close, as the vaccine rollout was as successful as it was across our entire United Kingdom, support for the UK staying together whizzes right back up. And for the last year or so, those who want the United Kingdom to stay together in Scotland have outpolled those who want the United Kingdom to break apart. And so often I feel like we are missing this corrective to the narrative. So often we conflate the views of the Scottish Nationalist Party with the views of the Scottish people. And they're not the same thing. The Scottish Nationalist Party failed to win a majority at the last Scottish elections, although Nicola Sturgeon today will be pushing ahead with her plans for another partition referendum, despite those facts. Well, let's explore not only that, but also the week in politics, as the Prime Minister has said the price of freedom is worth paying after the UK pledged a further £10 million to repair Ukrainian infrastructure. Currently, the government has said it's spent over £1.3 billion on military support for Ukraine. This comes amid discontent in Westminster as rumours swirl about potential Tory defections, letters of no confidence and faith in Boris Johnson's ability to lead the nation. This was only intensified by the government's brutal defeats in last week's by-elections. So where does the lay of political land lie? Well, joining me now is Alice Grant, a political commentator. And I suppose, Alice, the first question really is, where is the Prime Minister today? A parliamentary victory last night, but last week, some defeats in the real country.
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for having me on. So this morning, I believe the Prime Minister actually just went on a quick swim in the Bavarian Alps before going to meet the President of Japan, which was obviously quite a successful meeting. Yes, there's been a lot going on in politics this week. I think what's going on at home is obviously quite different from what's going on abroad at the G7 summit. In Westminster, many politicians are showing a lot of, reluctance to support Boris right now in his premiership, which I find quite worrying, because even though his premiership hasn't been perfect, I think that getting rid of him now would be quite a risky strategy, particularly when the geopolitical climate is at such a state, it's so fragmented. And I just think Boris should definitely be concerned with the kind of criticism coming towards his policies, but instead should start implementing policies which would appease any critiques and also hopefully be popular with the British people too. I'm thinking particularly in terms of addressing the cost of living crises. Household bills for gas and electricity have just skyrocketed, and this is causing so much, I think, concern with the British people. So he must address this if he really wants to start tackling the criticism from his premiership. It's a massive problem for the voters. So
it's interesting looking how the Prime Minister is perceived abroad. There was a poll recently done of G7 countries just in the midst of this G7 conference in Bavaria, which showed that the United Kingdom was seen as the country of those G7 countries that responded best to the Ukraine crisis. It's interesting to see how the Prime Minister is seen in international affairs to have done relatively well, whereas he comes under a great deal of scrutiny for his personal conduct and indeed some of his policy when it comes to domestic affairs.
Yes, yeah. I think we can be quite proud as a nation of our show of charity for the Ukrainian refugees. But then again, there is also this underlying feeling within the voters and within British people right now that Boris Johnson is spending billions of pounds, millions in aid to Ukraine, which is, all well and good. It is our duty to be charitable to neighbours in need. I completely am with that. But the reality is that British families right now are facing a crisis when it comes to energy bills, household bills, which are just, spiralling out of control in terms of how much they're costing British families. We simply can't afford this. This is an untenable situation, and charity starts at home. I'm sure that many British voters are happy to send aid to Ukraine. As a nation, we're I think, quite kind and charitable people. But at this point, there are many issues that we have to face domestically, especially post-pandemic, which has seen the destruction of many small businesses and the loss of livelihoods. So
well, Alice Grant, thank you for joining us this morning. We're just about to get to some of those issues there. So thanks for joining us, and we will be...
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Great.
Well, now, we were discussing there the potential for the cost of living crisis to really bite. And with GDP growth projected next year to be nil, politicians are looking to find ways to solve this issue. One of the ways is through science and technology, a potential growth area for the United Kingdom. Last week, I headed along to a scientific superpower conference in Westminster to explore the ways in which the UK could harness science to grow. Government says it wants the United Kingdom to become a scientific superpower. Well, how can it go about doing that? What policies does it need to adopt to unleash the potential of the scientific sector in the United Kingdom? Well, I've come to this conference here at the QE2 Centre in the heart of Westminster to speak to some of the experts who know how to do just that.
Is that the government can't ignore regions and clusters like the Oxford-Cambridge Arc and the Golden Triangle if we're going to achieve levelling up across the country. Our estimates from Bidwell showed that the Arc has the potential to add £235 billion to the UK economy by 2030. And I think we're going to need that capital if we're going to drive levelling up. And we're also going to need the life sciences space, the laboratory space, across clusters like the Oxford-Cambridge Arc if companies are going to scale up and create the kind of unicorns we've seen across the US.
So the Oxford-Cambridge Arc as a project could create a new sort of Silicon Valley in the United Kingdom.
I think that's exactly right. And while I'm wary to make direct comparisons, I think that if we're going to achieve some of the really precocious growth we've seen in the US and in clusters like Silicon Valley, but also in Boston and Massachusetts, we're going to need real investment into the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, and it needs to be high up on the government's agenda.
What do you say to those who say that the government pouring more money into areas around London, into the southeast, into those well-to-do cities in the first place, that might harm other regions of the country?
Well, the Oxford-Cambridge Arc is going to be a real engine for growth for the UK economy. And while levelling up and the levelling up agenda is really important, we're not going to be able to do it if the UK economy doesn't grow by 2030.
All these different industries here today are talking to each other. Do you think they all understand that it's that sort of cooperation that's needed?
I think we've seen a real change. Originally, there used to be property folks and scientific folks, and there wasn't that closeness. And I've really seen a change over the last, particularly the last 5 years of understanding the occupier or the customer and their needs. And that's really exciting to see that today. You can hear the buzz in the room, and I'm so proud of the way the industry has changed and taken those changes on board. I think the government, has really put a lot of money behind science. And, that's one of the leading assets for the UK. What we've got to do better is translate that science. We're third in the world for innovation, but we're 13th in the world for scaling that up. And I think that's our next phase of growth. And the government's looking at that. We're only a small island, really, but it's connecting it and just doing a few things well and spending in the right place to drive that growth. Well, what is it that makes a cluster grow? Well, when I look at clusters, I always think of the whole innovation supply chain, right from the academic or even commercial researcher base They do the blue sky research, the what if, the innovation. The little startups, the entrepreneurs, take that innovation and they turn it into early stage products. And then you need to put them next together with the bigger companies who understand how to get things out to market and the manufacturing piece. So you bring all of those together, and that makes a cluster. And then what I do is I wrap around it a really supportive environment. And that's, we start off there with access to facilities. Little companies have no time and no money, so for them to get access to shared equipment and flexible space that they can grow with them, because their people are their assets and they need to be able to move to flexible, bigger space. So there's the technical aspects, then it's all about skills and talent pool. The second thing we always put in is training. Now that can be formal training, accelerator programs, all sorts of skills training. But also I find the informal, where it's just mentoring or networking. I run a little CEOs club, and the mature CEOs, they help the little ones come through because nobody's got all the answers right at the beginning. And then the last piece I put in is also finance, getting the right type of finance at the right time. So for the early stage companies, maybe it's grants, maybe it's you. They always say fools, friends and family, you get your money early on, but you need that continuum all the way up. So you need to understand all the different investors, what they're looking for to take you through that journey right the way up to public offerings and so on. So it's getting those aspects together in one cluster that really drives innovation and the results for the UK.
Investing into regions like the Oxford-Cambridge arc is not at odds with the levelling up agenda. It's actually a supportive part, because if you have areas that are very innovative and that they're creating growth opportunities, you get spillover effects into the rest of the UK. That might be through collaboration with universities outside of the Oxford-Cambridge arc area. It might be about establishing manufacturing capability in different parts of the UK. We need to make sure that the government really reprioritises the Oxford-Cambridge arc and sees it as part of the holistic solution to growth and not something that's at odds with some of their other policy agendas.
Well, there's a spill-on effect as it goes out. So then these companies there'll be knock-on jobs as they grow and expand. Manufacturing jobs will come forward, and that's how the kind of New England whole ecosystem has been driven out of Harvard and MIT as it rolls out. I really think the biggest challenge is just thinking big. Having government and developers and the life science sector to think big and to push the envelope and to take risks. That's the biggest challenge that I've seen.
Now, what is an architect doing here at a scientific superpower conference?
Because architecture is important to deliver a scientific superpower. You need great spaces and great places to attract the talent. Creating a scientific superpower, it's not easy, I guess. It's complex. So you need to get all the different areas and the different expertise aligned towards the same goal.
Well, the UK has always been a world-leading nation in terms of science and engineering. But what I think we're seeing now is that we're going through a proper root and branch, complete rebalancing of how the UK economy functions and operates globally with its friends internationally. And that's now rooted in our great science and engineering, but it's also rippling out into high-value advanced manufacturing. There's an economic reality, which is we are going into a moment of difficulty because of all the money that's been printed, frankly. A lot of asset prices have gone up simply by virtue of the fact that more than 20% of the total US dollar stock at the moment was printed in the last 30 months. So there is a reality that there's some over-exuberance in some sectors. But I'm a great optimist in as much as we do have this incredible foundation of science and engineering expertise. We're completely capable in the UK, a small island, and actually joining the dots between talented communities such that they function collaboratively and mutually support each other and go harder and faster. And we are winning, and we are number one in a series of sectors already, and we can continue to do that. So government has a challenge because government wants to have a long-term policy strategy, but also butts up against on a regular basis the realities of a short-term by-election pressure. And the democratic difficulty that we have perhaps not explained to the population of the UK that what we are at this conference discussing is how we can improve the socio-economic health position of our children and all the people that live in the UK now. And most of the things that we're doing now are very definitely for people. They're not being done to or at people. But I do sympathise with the government because whilst we're all consistently frustrated that perhaps long-term strategic policy gets sort of blown off course, shall we say, by short-term political expediency, it is very difficult to do. And I think we nationally, as a culture, need to be a bit more accepting of the fact that there will be some painful moments and some communities will not feel entirely delighted. But for the good of the greater whole and the future of the next generation, there are some extraordinary opportunities that we can now grasp. I'm hugely optimistic. I think we've got an incredible opportunity. We're a small, focused, very highly skilled nation. And we already have extraordinary credentials. The Oxford COVID vaccine is just one example. We're leading in the space industry in small and medium-sized satellites. We're leading in fusion energy. There are a series of sectors where the UK is very definitely, it's almost sort of peerless in terms of its capabilities. And we need to double down on those areas and actually carry on growing.
Now I'm here with Tiago, who's a research robot here at the conference, and he can move around. He can even shake people's hands, as I did a little bit earlier with Tiago. We get along very, very well. But he can also speak, and we've agreed that Tiago's going to sign off this little segment for us today. So do you know what? Take it away, Tiago.
Goodbye. You have been watching The Briefing with Tom Harwood and me, Tiago, on GB News.
Well, there we go. There was Tiago the robot. That was a really fascinating conference there. But I've been looking at some of your views as that package has been playing, and we've been able to see quite a few come in. Graham has written in to talk about that Cambridge-Oxford arc that was mentioned by those people interested in creating a scientific superpower here in the United Kingdom. And Graham says it's not an Oxford-Cambridge arc that's required, it's a university dome that incorporates the many great universities within the UK. But I suppose there's an issue there in terms of diminishing returns. The idea about the Oxford-Cambridge arc is that you sort of connect these two globally renowned research centres that haven't been able to expand, that don't have the lab space required to do that pioneering research. And you sort of pepper people in between and make the connections very strong, so that then, in effect, they're larger cities than they actually are. I wonder if that would work with more universities as well. There's a big question, however, as to whether or not the government is actually backing the idea. Now, on the Scotland question, Angie has written in to say, I fear that the separatists will win another referendum. This is despite, of course, those graphs that we showed a little bit earlier, showing that those who want to keep the United Kingdom together are currently ahead of those who want to break up the United Kingdom. But Angie notes to how Alex Salmond behaved during the last Scottish referendum in 2014, where Angie describes Alex Salmond basically giving what she calls a hate speech to children on television. And of course, it was 16-year-olds who were able to vote in that referendum as well, as they would undoubtedly in any future referendum. Gary in Langholm in Scotland has written in to say that he's 50-50 on the issue of independence. But if Boris Johnson is still in Downing Street at the next referendum, he will vote to split up the UK. The man is a joke, heading a party that has not won a general election in Scotland since 1955. Although, I mean, I hasten to disagree with you there, Gary, but it does seem a strange idea to base the idea of the future of your country off one leader of a moment. That's basing the entire future of Scotland off this one Prime Minister who, no matter how many general elections he may win, and of course yesterday he was talking about winning 2 more, whether or not he would do that, I suppose, is up for question. But he's not going to be Prime Minister forever. And so that would be a very big step to take, to break up the United Kingdom off the back of one man. Now, just finally, David has written in to ask, why is the media not showing the same consorted attack on the Durham police inquiry into Starmer as they did for the Prime Minister? And I'm glad that that David has written in on this issue, because it's something that has not been covered enough. Of course, Keir Starmer took several weeks to put in his police survey into lockdown drinking, and over the weekend we learnt that Durham police do indeed issue retrospective fines for events. And FOIs put forward by the Mail on Sunday revealed, Freedom of Information requests, that is, they revealed that actually Durham police have issued fines for gatherings smaller than that attended by Sir Keir Starmer, and indeed fines that took place for events that took place in the same month as Sir Keir Starmer. So that is a very interesting proposition, and we should be expecting something out of Durham police this summer. So our eyes will be peeled on that, and perhaps that's something we'll explore a little bit more later in the week on this programme. But that's it today from The Briefing. Thank you so much for your company this morning. Coming up, it's To The Point. But first, here's the weather forecast.
Morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Bit of an east-west split with the weather today. In the east, a fine summer's day, really. Sunny spells, temperatures into the low 20s. Further west, a very different story. This is the reason why. Low pressure and weather fronts that have been creeping in through the night. Pretty wet start for Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland as the rain persists in western Scotland through the day. It could cause some disruption. We have a Met Office yellow warning in place. The rain will slowly edge away from Northern Ireland and at the same time creep its way into western parts of Wales and later today into southwest England. But a good part of England, bar the odd shower across the southeast, looking dry and fine with good spells of sunshine from Yorkshire down through to Kent, and temperatures here 22, 23, maybe 24 Celsius. But further west with that rain, temperatures struggling in the high teens at best. As I said, that rain particularly heavy over southwest Scotland, persisting into the evening. At the same time, it spreads more widely across Wales, southwest England, northwest England, breaking up a little bit as we go through the night, but eventually turning pretty wet over the Midlands also. Still, across eastern England, most places will be dry through the night. It's not quite as chilly as the night just gone, but as the wet weather clears from Northern Ireland, we could see temperatures here with some clearer spells dipping down to single figures. On to Wednesday, and it's a bit of a mishmash. We'll still have this stripe of cloud covering a good part of England with some outbreaks of rain, and we could see some heavy showers breaking out through the afternoon, particularly over northeast England, but also parts of Wales and southwest England. Elsewhere, the showers very much hit and miss. Many places dry and bright. A much brighter day tomorrow for western Scotland. Temperatures again in most places high teens, but again eastern England could get into the low 20s. Low pressure continues to dominate through Thursday. More showers to come here, but signs of high pressure bringing drier weather across the south by Friday.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
We are GB News.
We're